Dear colleagues, dear students, dear guest scholars, and dear colleagues online, and scholars online, and students online, it's a very big honor for me to stay here today with you and give you an introduction in a very personal note of Professor Saonee Sarker, a very dear colleague of mine at the Department of Informatics here at LUSEM. It was 2014 when a very dear colleague of mine at Linnaeus University, just a little bit north from here, told me, "Have you ever taken classes with Saonee Sarker?" And she then continued by saying, "If you haven't, you really missed one of the greatest lecturers, because not only she knows how to convey a message to a student, she actually conducts research, groundbreaking research on that topic, so you really missed a lot." In 2015, I actually stepped into the department where Saonee Sarker was a visiting professor. Now you might start thinking or doubting like, "Oh, were you stalking Saonee Sarker?" I promise you it was a big coincidence that I was brought into a department where Saonee Sarker was a visiting professor at that time. And her visits at my department at that time, when I was present, were the most anticipated. And her guest seminars and very personal meetings that we could hold with her were really ones that brought most attention from all. So you realize now that not only did I get to meet Saonee in 2015 as a visiting professor, I actually got to work with her as a full professor at my department since 2021. And with Saonee, I could actually sit and reflect, I could build, I could strategize, and I could learn a lot. And I can tell you that Saonee's work and that groundbreaking research is central to understanding that we as humans have a responsibility to build and develop technology that will create a better life for all. I cannot stress enough that her groundbreaking research is actually giving us an edge at Lund University, and particularly here at LUSEM, to really understand how important that is, and it's a value. I would like to finalize my introduction of Saonee through the words of Einstein, that aiming to be a human of values is what is worth in this world. This represents Saonee to me and to us by making us to become more curious, to question the very essence of what it takes to construct a beautiful life for all and for this planet, and not to forget that technology will always remain central to that. So, honored again to have this introduction on a very personal note for you, Saonee, and I would like to offer you the floor. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Miranda. I hope I can live up to that for the next hour. This was very, very heartwarming. Well, I'm very honored and happy to be here with all of you and those here online. It was always difficult to share one's work in 35 minutes. Peter knows how many times we struggled in making sure that I'm not crowding everything with ideas and stuff. So I wanted to look at the role of digitalization and kind of see what does digitalization's impact is, and more focus on the humanistic side of that impact. Because when we talk about digitalization, we often talk about efficiency, effectiveness, business processes done quickly, cost. I want to step back and say, okay, let's look at some other impacts. What are we doing to the people, right? So before I get started, let me just quickly get on the same page here and make sure that we all understand what is digitalization. And this is just taken from some of the literature, some practice-oriented stuff, but digitalization includes infusion of technology and hyperconnectivity across elements. It has elements of datafication, it has elements of platformization, and it has elements of robotification. And then digital transformation, which is a term that we hear all the time, is a process that it basically aims to improve an entity through all of this platformization, datafication, robotification, and also including other kinds of infrastructure and security and those sort of elements. So now we have a common understanding of what I'm going to try and talk about and the impact of digitalization. So I want you to all close your eyes for 5 seconds. Imagine a digitalized classroom of school children. Let's get creative. Think about maybe a robot is in the classroom as well. And you can get your creativity going and imagine whether the robot is a student, the robot is doing something else. But close your eyes for 5 seconds and think about it. All right, let's see an image here. Okay? By the way, this is not a fictitious image. This is a classroom, and things are happening like this. So you have students, you have a teacher, and you also have a robot. The students come into the classroom, the robot greets them, the students are submitting the homework, the robots are going to take things down, digitally record it, that they are submitting homework. The teacher comes into the class, starts the class. The students also have headbands that are going to monitor their brain waves, their concentration, how much are they paying attention to the teacher, and all that information is going to the robot, is going to the teacher as well. And the robot is also making sure that the teacher is doing the right things, is sticking to lesson plans, is not going off topic, is covering what is required for that particular period, right? Now, all of this data is also directly going to the parents. So at the end of every hour, parents are getting information about your child is not paying attention to this concept. Your child is not picking up this concept. Or your child is doing fantastic. So you have a set of parents who are frustrated, set of parents who are elated at the end of every hour. And at the other side of this, you have this information going to the principal's office. Principal knows which students are not paying attention, whether the teacher is performing well, whether the classroom is in complete harmony. And the government, healthcare agencies, talent spotting agencies are also getting all of that data. So they can get to the gifted students right away, do an early recruitment for college, students who are having concentration issues, healthcare agencies, insurance companies are running after them, their parents, to see how can we do some interventions, right? And you will say, well, what's wrong with that? We have great students, we are identifying gifted students, we are identifying potentially concerning mental health issues. We are making sure that the teachers are performing well. We are making sure schools are doing well. So they are keeping to schedule. So the school districts and the school communities are flourishing. There's more money going to flow in. So those are the good sides, right? More computing power, better data, qualified professionals, more funding, more relationship development, industry, government agencies, school districts, computer companies, they're all coming together to enable such a wonderful environment. However, are we missing something here? The not so good, right? There is a robot supervising a teacher. We are all teachers. How would we like that? More technology-induced stress. Think about wearing a headband. And let's say I'm a professor, and I'm wearing a headband, and my department chair, who's sitting here, is getting every hour messages, Saonee is not paying attention in a meeting, or she is slacking, right? Would I like it? I wouldn't. Nicholas is thinking, oh, wow, that's a great idea, actually. Increased oppression. Unsustainable digitalization process. Can we sustain this kind of a thing? Or where do we end, right? There is obviously so much of computing, so much of data being shared. There is a possibility, are we giving up almost a gift to our hackers on a platform? Hey, come and invade our security and privacy here. So today I want to spend a few minutes, or the rest of the minutes we have, talking about that processes, right? Now, obviously, there's a whole bunch of things that are happening here, or not so good, but I want to focus on the stress aspect, technology-induced stress. I want to focus a little bit on blurring of the boundaries, because this kind of an environment obviously is blurring many things, our lives, our work, our school lives, and also increased oppression. Okay? So let me start off with our first story, or first tale, which is techno-stress. So I'm going to switch away from the classroom, but take the same idea and take it into a healthcare setting. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of how these studies came about. I didn't want to make it too academic. But these are studies that we have done, and my research teams have done for many years with many hospitals, with healthcare workers, and healthcare workers specifically in the US, in Germany, in India, and a lot of embedded studies in hospitals. So before I get to actually what we saw when we have too much of technology infusion, is just get the story straight about what is stress, right? Because I'm talking about technology-induced stress. So stress is a perception that the demands made on them and their perceptions of the capability to meet those demands are not there. There's a mismatch, right? Now, traditionally, stress has always been seen as negative, because if you think about it, if you ask me, are you stressed? And I said, yes, oh my God, I'm so stressed, right? It has a negative connotation, which is the concept of distress. That is that negative perception of those demands. But there is also a positive stress and the idea of eustress, which means that it gives us a positive perception of the demands. So if we are going to be so dependent on technology and we are going to use a lot of technology, then I think it would be our goal to ensure that we reduce our distress and try and increase our eustress. So because we can't say no technology, right? How can we use it in a balanced way? So we did these studies with a lot of healthcare workers. And why, you would say, why healthcare? Since about 2013 or so, there has been a lot of, I would say, digitalization in healthcare. Every country you look at is looking into e-health. In the United States, for example, there was a mandate that every healthcare data has to be digitalized. Those files that nurses would pull out no longer would exist. There's a lot of healthcare software being used in the OR or in the surgeries while they are doing surgery to regular patient. And this is not just a phenomenon in one part of the world, everywhere, right? And healthcare workers are not technologists. They have come to take care of patients. They know how to do that. They do not know really how to use technology. So there's inherently some level of conflict. I was last week at my doctor's here at Cree, right across the street, and he was having a terrible day with technology that day. So when I met him and I said, can you look at my previous test and tell me what that? He said, yes, if I can log into that software. And then it just wasn't happening. And he said, they don't understand. I'm a doctor. I don't know hocus pocus with technology. And I think that captures what I experience with healthcare workers is because I'm a medical professional. I am here to take care. I know medicine, I know diseases, I know detection. I don't know all the technological stuff, right? So there people would say, oh yeah, technology is bad. We cannot do with technology in healthcare, so we have to make it very simple, or we have to make it very complex, very easy. We have to make it constant. So what we found is a little bit of a different story, which is, yes, they don't like technology. It is inducing a lot of stress. However, it is not just the one end of the continuum that simple technologies can be useful, or fixed technologies is useful. What we found is that each technological element has two sides of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Constancy versus change, right? Some of these softwares are constantly being updated. Some of these softwares are constantly being changed, or the same software could have both elements. And it's not like that the ones who are changing is being more in technology-induced stress to the people, or the ones who are not being changed, which technologies are the ones who everyone likes. Healthcare workers have, even the same vision of the technology could have very different views. The same thing, maneuverability and fixedness of the technologies. So for example, in the US, all of these software, and Epic is the major software that is used in healthcare, they are loaded on desktops and laptops. And the laptops on those computers are loaded onto these machines called carts on wheels. They are called cows, in short. And you're supposed to be wheeling that all around corridors, into doctors' offices, out of offices, into hospital, next to patient beds, and so on. On one hand, people liked the maneuverability of the hardware, right? You could take it next to the bedside, you could move it around, so you have that real maneuverability. So that reduces my stress, right? On the other hand, that same maneuverability was a problem. Why? Because they felt that, I'm sitting next to a patient's bed, I'm trying to have small talk with them, I'm trying to get to know my patients who is sick, I'm trying to make them feel comfortable. But now, all my attention is on the patient next to the patient bed, is on the computer, trying to do all the inputs, right? So the same maneuverability that they can do next to the patient bed is something that is making them so stressed because they feel lost time. I have to move on to the other patient, but I'm not getting the time with this particular patient, right? So I think what we have found and what I wanted to convey is when we think about technology designs, specifically in healthcare, the speaking about in superlatives and always saying one end of the technology spectrum, maneuverability, is the best, or one end of the technology is worst, is the wrong way to view it. We have to come to a balanced view, because the maneuverability itself, as I gave you an example, could be a good thing, may not be a good thing. So we have to come to somewhere in the middle to be able to really take the best out of those technologies. Some of the other things we found, which is probably pretty typical, is usefulness of the technology in healthcare workers, their involvement in the implementation. My doctor even said the other thing. He said, when they build these systems and they design these systems, no one came and talked to us. That's a very, very important thing. I mean, we can always say, that we always know user participation is so important in technology design. But even though we all know it, we are still not doing it, right? And it is more so in healthcare because the domain is so different from the domain of the system designers. It is such a different, I, as a user, if you're talking about a productivity software, everyone in this room have done a productivity software, right? So if I were to design a productivity software, it's easier for us to relate what the design would look like. But a healthcare is so different. I don't really understand what a nurse does, right? I mean, I'm just my very limited interactions. So it's very important that we involve them in every spirit of the design. And all of that contributes to eustress. And eustress was really giving them a lot of positive job satisfaction. Inability to use unreliability of the system, technical overload, insecurities around the use of the system. A lot of healthcare workers said that, because I don't understand technology and I understand healthcare, when I talk to IT, they often treat me like I'm ignorant, right? And because of that, I don't go to them. And because of that, my problem never gets fixed. And because of that, I carry on the stress of using that technology. So I think we need to be a little bit more considerate in dealing with healthcare workers. They're great at what they do. They're not just great at what the technology does. So that's something to think about. And then if you have distress, obviously it's going to contribute to job dissatisfaction, and then lower job dissatisfaction to turnover intention. We found this, a lot of these studies that we did was on the west coast of the United States, which is in a city where there was a hub of heart health. So there was a whole lot of hospitals that was known as the pioneering of heart health in that. And those were the hospitals we were studying. They were having such a lot of turnover. The nurses were leaving. That's how we got involved in the study, actually, because the technologies had been implemented, and nurses were leaving in a huge, big ways, to the extent that they were not just leaving the hospital, they were leaving the profession. They were choosing to become someone else. They were becoming, working in a front office in other kind of industries and going away from healthcare, which is sad on many different levels because it is their passion that drew them to this profession. They're not realizing the passion. And a shortage of healthcare workers is a tremendous loss. And US, here, Germany, a lot of the countries have tremendous shortage. UK, if you read UK every day, there is news about shortage of healthcare workers. So they are so essential to our lives. It's our role to be able to make their lives a little better, and without mandating the use of technology, I think it is better to see how we can work the technology seamlessly into their lives. All right. So I'll now switch to our second story. This is about structural injustice. And I'll take you, so from United States and this part of the world, we're going to go fast forward to Australia and go to another part of the world. And this is a case that is very, very known. I know we have people from Australia here, so I know they're aware of the story. Just I want you to take a minute to read this. OK, so if you're wondering what this is, it's a welfare payment, Australian government's welfare services, welfare payment. And there is a part of the service is that to always calculate if there are wrong payments, like someone who doesn't deserve that welfare and getting it, right? So detecting fraud and detecting mistakes in those welfare payments. So this is an example of a person who is a welfare recipient and was given a notice that this person owes the Australian government some amount of time, money. And already, if you think about welfare people, right, those who are receiving welfare payments are usually a particular kind of group of people, and already they are disadvantaged. And now you're giving them narratives or debt notices, which is leading them further into either poverty or other kinds of issues. So this is a quick sense of events that happen. I'm sorry for the font. I struggle to keep it large enough, but I'll just read it out to you. Basically, the Australian Government Services Australia delegated the power of sort of delivering social security payments to this organization or agency called Centrelink. And they used a technique called data matching. So the data of these actually resided in multiple places, and they used that to match and say, OK, is it a right payment or not, and then issue those if they detect an overpayment, they would send out some notice. Now, this was becoming a very overwhelming task for the Centrelink because they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things to do. Digitalization solution, right? Overloaded, we need efficiency. So what they did is they designed a new system. An ADM system is an algorithmic decision-making system. They got this new ADM system and gave it to the role of the ADM was to automatically sort of generate these payments. The system identified discrepancies and autonomously, keyword here, dispatched the payment notices to those citizens that it identified as having a welfare debt. And then calculations turned out to be very flawed because the matching technique used was unfortunately wrong, and the data from which the algorithm was getting it was not kept in the right way or in the right thing. So there was a lot of overpayment notices, and it disproportionately affected those people who were already quite vulnerable. Now, there's a lot of nitty-gritty details in this case of things that happened, so I'm not going to go into all of the debt, but note one thing here. A lot of the people who were getting these notices did not deserve to get these notices. They were not being overpaid. They had not been overpaid, but they were now being asked to provide a lot of different evidence that there is not overpaid, that they had lost their job at that time, or they didn't have a pay slip in those months for a job. Like one victim said, I had quit that job. I didn't have that job for the last 7 years. Who do I chase to get anything from there to provide all the evidence? So they were getting bills of $7,000 or $10,000. Where are they going to get that money, right? So how was it resolved? This started to become a lot of media news, just fast forwarding. And it got the term robo-debt in the media. And it soon came under the scrutiny of the ombudsman and the Senate and so on. And more importantly, an activist kind of took it upon herself to form this portal called #NotMyDebt. and initiative, gathering journalists and other people to rally behind and to popularize the narratives of the victims, and designed a very nice system using Slate and other kinds of technologies, and it went viral to the extent that a class action lawsuit was filed. That was a success of the Not My Debt hashtag thing. And it was soon announced that it was going to be settled. And the entire cost of it was approximately 1.2 billion Australian dollars to the government. So a digitalization initiative that started off to help the government to make these payments easier and more efficient turned out to be not only more expensive, but also humanistically extremely oppressive, right? Because it was the algorithm that had gone wrong. So another lesson, let's not run after, right? Always efficiency. Designing algorithm, yes, if the algorithm can do all of it, great, but what if something goes wrong? Are we going to ask $10,000 from people who do not deserve to pay it, cannot afford to pay it, already couch surfing, and don't have the ability to? Are we going to make them much more oppressive, right? So this is the oppressive force that could become a reality, which in this case is for these kinds of issues. All right. So I want to move on to our last tale, work-life conflict. And I thought I'd leave the last one, which all of us can relate to, which is work-life conflict and the digitalization's impacts. When this study started in 2009-10, one of the people asked me, why was I doing this topic? Apart from the fact this topic was introduced to me by a very large IT company. I don't think I have NDA with them, so I can tell their name, Microsoft. So I owe it to them, because I didn't even know in 2009 that this was actually a term that we needed to work on. And they brought it to focus. But I thought, well, why not? I don't have any work-life balance. This might be a way I'll find some solutions to that. So think about this. In the last 2 years of COVID, I'm sure you can relate to these images, right? Your child playing, you're trying to work. You're working with your child on your lap. And trying and struggling to balance ourselves, right? Balance our different things. What is really work-life conflict or balance? And these are some definitions. I'm not going to read them out so you can see, but conflict and balance kind of seen as the two ends of the continuum. If you don't have conflict, you're reaching towards balance. If you do not have balance, you're on the work-life conflict zone. And if you do not take care of it, like the techno-stress, that can be a huge issue for employee turnover, job performance, and job dissatisfaction, and all of the well-being and many other factors. What do we know from the industry? So why am I suddenly jumping on digitalization and work-life balance? This is some of this that we have seen from globally. That is a global concern. This is something from Mexico in terms of their work-life balance. This is a news from UK IT people. And a lot of the study, by the way, let me qualify, is done on IT workers, the workers who are doing IT kind of work, software development, application development, security, maintenance, infrastructure. But I feel it applies to a lot of us who may not be in that pure IT work. This is from Australia. This is from home here. Sweden, I don't know if you know this, but it is known in the work-life balance world that it is the world or land of work-life balance. Even there, we are experiencing challenges. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella was recently asked, those who are struggling with work-life balance, what is your suggestion? How do we deal with it? He said, what do you mean there's no such thing as balance? Scary, right? If the company CEO is saying that, why should we care then? IT company CEO saying there's no such thing as balance. I'll come back to that. Yeah, I do not want to be dissing Satya Nadella here. He meant something else, but I'll come back to it. But why should we care? Because, deaths, health issues, marital problems, all of these things happen if you are, you do not have work-life balance. Or employees who are unable to perform the best of their ability, they may choose to walk away from the profession. And we saw that a lot in IT world because they cannot deal with it, right? And we saw, for example, a very large IT consultant, this is in Korea, who was very senior, very significantly successful, but could not handle the work-life balance. And he chose to basically quit and became a farmer. IT work to farmer, IT consulting to farmer, right? We were talking to a very senior person in another company in LG, and he said that in his entire 365 days, he has had dinner with his family 28 days. Right? So what we found, there's a lot of things that matter. And our use of digitalization is actually creating those blurring of those boundaries to a significant extent that we are not finding the balance. We are not able to switch off. So if you're going to work with people, for example, if you're going to work with people who are in very different time zones, which is a very typical thing for IT work, and now for every one of us, right? In the last 2 years, how many meetings do we do where we are in different parts of the world and in different time zones? So if you're doing those kinds of things, then one thing that was very evident is not the number of time difference that matters. It's how many number of time overlaps do you have. I'll give you a quick example on that. So Microsoft, for a very long time, had all their clients and project managers located in the west coast of US, Seattle, Redmond. And their development was done 90% in India, which is about 13 and a half hours time difference between Seattle and India. And their testing was done in China, where time difference between China was about 16 to 18 hours, right? And you would say it's easier with India, right? Time difference, 18 hours, how can you work? But what Microsoft was doing is, during their development, when they were sending projects, were going to the developers, when you start doing development, you have so many questions from your clients, from your project manager. They kept asking those questions, but by the time India asked those questions, US had gone off to sleep. By the time they woke up and didn't understand the questions and send clarification and answers, India has gone off to sleep. So they were losing a day and a half in every software development cycle's one iteration of questions. And that was becoming very, very expensive. But with China, they had a significant number of overlap hours, which means that there was a significant number of hours, about 4 or 5 hours during the day, when India was not going to, where one end was not going to be at 5 in the morning and one end was not going to be at midnight, which is the worst time that you can have two people working. So they had a significant number of during the hour of the day that they could actually overlap and clarifying these questions, because some work needs synchronicity. We may always say, no, 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 everything can be digitalized, but let me tell you, there is a lot of work where you do need that synchronous answer, synchronous collaboration, coordination. And they found that to be a better one. So they changed their business practices. Think about a big, large company changing practices to the extent where they made China the developing center, India became the testing hub. So what this tells us is that these impacts are not just things that we are coming up with or thinking about, or it's like, yeah, it's a localized problem. It's a global problem, it's a big problem, it's a problem that is expensive on the human side, expensive on the economic side, and can lead to long-lasting things, which is basically trying to even in terms of business changes and business practices. The other thing that we found is that the relationship between work and life. Every company, if you ask, do you have work-life balance practices? They'll say yes. We have a whole bunch of FFPs, organizational family-friendly policies. We roll them out. And everyone has access to it. But why would it be useful when not everyone thinks the same? I can bet you, if we all interview each other here today, our version of work-life balance will never be the same. So there are people who believe in a very segmented boundaries. My work ends at 4 or 5, and my life starts. I am not going to do work things in the evening, right? Some people have a little bit of a continuum and saying that, I'm okay with a little bit overlap. Maybe one day I can take a meeting, or one day I have to do this at 6 o'clock. But in general, I like it segmented. And then some people are very, very encompassing. They cannot separate work and life. They live at work. They do everything at work. Now, if you give a practice which is meant for a segmented person to an encompassing person, it will not work. Same thing. A lot of companies will say, IT companies specifically, they'll say, oh, we have a gym, we have all kinds of cafeteria, we have leisure centers, we have gaming rooms, we have everything. Why are people not happy? Because they can do at work and then do all of that. But that's designed for an encompassing person who lives there in that office. A segmented person doesn't care if you have a gym. They want to go home and start their life, right? So it's very important for us to realize it's not a universal concept, which has always been sort of talked about, right? We first have to understand where we fall in this spectrum, and then design more more customized versions of it. And these are some tools, some strategies that we came up with that can help in terms of separation, compensation, planning, facilitation, integration. That is helpful for dealing with these different kinds of people. And more importantly, so this is a matrix that we actually gave to a lot of the companies that you find useful, is to first find where the person falls, and then use a metric or a strategy that is targeted towards that person, because universal policies do not work. And in addition to that person, or whoever's work-life balance we are trying to basically solve, one other thing that we found is very important, and I think it's a lesson for all of us, and especially those who are leading or administrating or have direct reports, is the idea of protection. It is not only important to focus on that person's work-life balance, it is to make sure that we are keeping that person protected from the supervisor who may have a very different view of work-life balance. So if your supervisor is an encompassing model and you are segmented, it's a tough thing, right? And there are many, many occasions where that happens quite a lot, and that leads to a lot of oppression and so on. And then the other thing where I want to circle back to Satya Nadella's comment is when we talk about work-life balance and digitalization, and I think, OK, IT has made our lives blurred. There is no boundary. We are constantly checking emails. We are looking at our mobile devices. We are answering, prompting. These days, when you send an email, you expect immediate reply, even if it is 7 in the evening or 10 in the evening. It's like, it cannot be that I didn't get it. Everyone has smartphones. They got it. They just chose not to respond. So that is not a good thing. I think it is important for us to say that in that world of expectations, maybe work-life balance is a very, very utopian concept, because work-life balance means, half and half. We are not half and half. So the goal to solve that problem is not, balance is not the term. Well, the term is harmonization or integration. So when Satya Nadella said there is no such thing as balance, he was actually very forward-thinking. He was suggesting let's integrate it seamlessly, let's harmonize. Don't run after a utopian concept that we may never reach. So when we design digitalization, let's keep the harmonization model in our minds, not a balance model, because we might set us up ourselves for failure. All right, so I want to leave some time for discussion. So I just want to say, looking ahead, this is where we are at. Digitalization, the promise of the good. We all know that, we focus on that, we all appreciate that. We can't imagine our lives without a lot of the digitalization that we are witnessing around. But then it's also the scare of the not so good. It almost seems like a seesaw that is happening. So as us, as academics, as practitioners, as industry people, I think this is our opportunity to come together, to join our hands, and to practice what I call responsible digitalization. Okay? Not untethered digitalization, reflective digitalization that helps us realize the good and the promises without basically falling victim to the scares and the downsides. Okay? With that, I'll open it up. So thank you for being such great listeners. And questions, comments, thoughts, anything, or if I'm wrong in my vision, tell me. I'm happy to revise it. So yeah. Oh, sorry. Techno-stress.
Okay. That's the whole point. Already on? Okay, okay. So I'm actually from Bangladesh. I used to work with a company called Augmedics, which is from USA. And they, right after the Obama healthcare system, that everything needs to be digitalized. So the healthcare system in USA, they faced a problem that all the doctors has very little time to actually talk to the patient. They're always writing and they're always digitalizing everything.
Yeah.
So then this Bangladeshi tech talent, I think in Florida, he came up with a solution with the Google Glass. If I wear the glass and whatever I'm seeing and listening, that starts recording. And if I'm remotely related, connected to a computer, that person can actually listen and look at what am I doing. So he actually offered the doctors and the healthcare system that you wear the glass, and whatever is happening here, people remotely, India, Bangladesh, or anywhere, will actually do the digitalization for you. Now they went to India. It was a very successful venture. Then they came to Bangladesh, and it's running in Bangladesh too successfully. Now the thing is, in Bangladesh, what I used to do, I actually helped them to train the English language and how to use the technology. But the main thing became, as you said, the time difference. So many girls are eligible and they want to do it, but it's night shift.
And they can't do it. That is a very typical problem in those countries.
Exactly.
For the woman. Yeah.
And then the boys also, it's life. It doesn't matter the gender. The female becomes more problematic, but for boys also, they want to go back home and be with the family. The whole family cannot change the timetable of Bangladesh to accommodate one person who is working night shift. So somehow, this digitalization in USA was being solved because doctors now have more time to talk to the patient because someone else is doing the writing job and, how do you say that? Like digitally documentation, digital documentation. But then here, I'm sure in India also, and in India, we actually, in Hyderabad and Bangalore, they actually have, in offices, they have counseling and they suggest practices so that their body also, adopts to stay up in the night and sleep in the daytime because our bodies are actually made and in a different way. So it needs a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think whatever you've narrated, we have seen that a lot. Not in the case of Google Glass uses in healthcare, but I think that is one of the things that we need to fight, because to help digitalization and get the benefits in one part of the world, we are creating inequity in the other part of the world. I know it's not a foolproof problem. I'm saying all this as if expecting the politicians to solve everything. It's not that, but I think that awareness that we are creating someone who has to now stay up all night and do that, because that is always done. One of the biggest complaints that the eastern part of the world and IT companies have is that they are always on US time. That has to change, right? Digitalization, that is why I'm saying balanced and digital responsible. It cannot be digitalization for one, and ignoring the rest, because then we are creating a very inequitable world.
Departments who would work in daytime in Bangladesh. because they are like, we don't really need to, we don't talk to the doctors, or we are not connected to the
Right.
doctors. So it's the administrative job. Then we want to work during daytime, so they started that. But then when something happens, administrative problem, anything happens during the night, then it has to wait until next morning,
Right, right.
when the person is actually sleeping, and now the administrative is
Right.
up.
Yeah. So, yeah. Absolutely.
No, actually not. No.
So I just want to, do you suggest anything? Sorry. Do you suggest anything for, I don't know, whom do we suggest to these companies or researchers?
See, I mean, I don't know
to-
this particular scenario because doctors have a particular time in which they are doing it, right? But I know what in the IT companies, when they've moved to realization, especially companies, I would say if it's like a Microsoft or so on, because they are not using third-party vendors in India or Bangladesh. They actually have an India office, right? They are Microsoft employees. Their China office is Microsoft employees. So there was that feeling that we are the stepchildren of the company, because if this kind of arrangement works. So what they have they did, and some other IT companies did, is that if you are having these sort of meetings once a week, it's one time is one time zone preference, one time is the other time zone, so it rotates, so that no one is at a disadvantage on a continuous way. Right, exactly, as a stepchild. Many companies did things like, to give that even to US employees the ability to work late in the night so that they are also adjusting to the better times in the East. They would give them off, like, in the middle. 2 to say 8, you take off in the afternoon, do your stuff, and come back at 8 and work. Now, who is a typical IT person, employee? 28 years average. What are they going to do from 2 to 8? There's nothing they can do, right? Their friends are at work, they have no socialization, and they hated it. So that didn't work either. So it's a lot of trial and error in those sort of issues. So.
We have another question up here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nicholas. I'm the head of the Department of
Who's
Informatics.
who's buying headbands for us right now, right?
First of all, thank you, Saonee. Impressive research, bringing a lot of value to the information systems discipline and to humans. I had the privilege to start to work with and getting to know Saonee in 2009. And I've always been amazed how you could foresee how large this topic should become, and important. So my question is, are we still struggling with the same aspects of stress and the same reasons for stress today as we were back when this research initiative first started? And are we moving towards responsible digitalization?
Wow, yeah, great questions. And I think there are two parts to that question. Are we reliving the same aspects of stress? I would say we are getting into a more complex world of stress. And I'll explain why. Because as you know, a lot of my work in research has been on the space of IT-enabled collaboration, right? Technology-enabled collaboration, where we are basically have people who are collaborating with technology, through technology, right? Video conferencing, Zooming, or working with remote softwares. But now we are moving to technology, not technology-enabled, but collaborating with technology. We are getting into human-AI hybrids. Healthcare is one place where we are seeing that increasingly, where you have a doctor and you have a robot actually performing a surgery together. And it's not a myth, right? I think it is becoming much more complex because I can imagine myself as a doctor, and let's say we are both doctors and we are doing a surgery together. I know how to deal with Nicholas in a way, kind of. Do I really know how to deal with a robot in a collaborative space? So that, I think our technology, I feel technology-enabled stress is going to become even more important and going to take on a more complex view in such kinds of situations. And we are seeing just the tip of the iceberg of that problem because that collaboration is not widespread, right? We all know how to collaborate over Zoom. I am still not collaborated with a robot independently or whatever, right? But I would. We live long enough, I think we will. So this is a topic that needs to be brought into focus and taken on a totally different meaning. You're asking the question of, are we doing responsible digitalization without hurting anyone's feelings? I would say we haven't. But I hope we are going to, right? Because digitalization, if you scour the literature on digitalization, if you look at technology, digitalization, practice reports, industry, how many people have said all the negative things? And I don't want to sound negative. I seem like this pessimistic person who's bringing all the negative things. No, but I think most are saying this is a great thing, digitalization. And I do agree it's a great thing. However, there are these downsides to it that we have to balance. So I think we are at the start of it, and I hope that through our awareness, academics are reflective people. We join hands with industry. It is our role to make sure we bring these problems to them, and they work with us to design so that we practice digitalization in a responsible way.
Thank you. We have another question.
Hello. Thank you so much. This was most educative. Something that arose for me was under the topic of techno-stress. And you mentioned how sort of clunky digitization in a hospital is really causing stress. And I totally understand that. I think that for me what arose is when technology started making its way into society, the premise was that technology was going to ease our lives, it was going to ease our work, we're going to work less. And instead it turned around and made us work more. The question for me, and I think that you really brought up a great point about the harmonization part, is, isn't it just so that on one end, more from a practical perspective, we have created or perhaps haven't created systems that are more harmonized in the way that humans both interpret and do practical work. So for example, what you mentioned over there is like, well, you can use Google Glass. Well, in my mind, you'd vision even further, you'd almost bring in a AI as a practical aspect. And you just sort of more navigate how the natural movement of the human body works together with technology rather than, creating a clunky wheel. That just sounds to me personally like somebody's really trying to make money and scavenge on top when you can just have a clunky system and mirror it on an iPad, which would mirror the effect of having something written down. And so I think my question is really, I understand the responsible part of it, and I do agree with it, but isn't some of the techno-stress just a matter of creating more practical technologies rather than trying to integrate something else?
Absolutely, I think I completely agree. It is to hold all, join hands together to say what that practical solution is, right? I mean, you kind of answered. It is totally true. Those cows are not useful. But what the problem is that the design of technology when it is happening, the comfort level of the humans or whatever is that that seamless integration is happening at a very surface level. And what I'm trying to say is we need to go deeper, right? At a surface level, you can say, well, we are giving you maneuverable technologies that you can wheel into next to the bed. You're not constantly running back and forth to do that. So isn't that a great thing? Yes, but it still has its issues. So I think if we bring those people into the conversation and join hands to do those designs, we can get to that a better state. And and the reason I say about healthcare is the story about healthcare and technology is going on for 15 years. Come on, I mean, now don't you think we should have some solution? And I always thought it's an American problem or my Swedish doctor gave me quotes, which I heard so many times from the American healthcare workers. 15 years later, why is it happening, right? So I think we have a little bit more distance to travel on that, and we can get there, but we have to join forces. And we have to move a little bit away from efficiency and the instrumental outcomes. I think what has dictated much of our digitalization is instrumental outcomes, cost efficiency. Let's look at humanistic. Balance it. I'm not saying look at only one side, but balance the two.
So, first of all, thanks so much for sharing such amazing insight with us. And actually, I want to share like another perspective from mine. And, I always tell my friends, my classmates that I'm a really boring person, but which actually not. Because I told people that LinkedIn is actually my only social media to connect the outside world. But if you cannot reach out to me or contact me on WhatsApp, just try to contact me on LinkedIn. I will reply. So, except the perspective you shared, actually, I want to say that sometimes, the technology causes stress, but sometimes, the stress is caused by the people behind the technology. For example, I quit Instagram like 2 to 3 years ago because I felt so stressed out by the content from the influencers on Instagram. So I just quit it. Sometimes when people use Instagram, use TikTok, the technology behind the Instagram actually, they try to create algorithm to get people addicted to, the short video, everything. And, the influencer, they try to add a lot of filters which cannot exist in real life sometimes, right? They live a fancy life, they buy the luxury, buy a lot of fancy goods, but actually it's not true in real life. So a lot, like teenagers, young people, they think this should be the real life, but actually not. That's why, except that, the technology itself creates some stress for people, but actually a lot of people behind the technology, they try to make people stress out. This is like another, perspective for the social issue sometimes. This is my observation.
No, and I completely agree with your observation. And I think maybe I should qualify when I use the word technology. I'm communicating that I'm just talking about the technology in isolation, and that is not. I'm an information systems researcher, and our definition of information systems is software, hardware, people, process, and data all together, right? So I think when I'm talking about technology, I'm actually meaning the ecosystem of the technology, not only just the actual piece of hardware and application, but also how it's implemented and used, and kind of the the ecosystem around it. And what you're referring to is that ecosystem, right? Social media connectivity amongst people who are not co-located was the idea behind Instagram or Facebook or whatever. I'm sorry, I'm not on Facebook, so I cannot really, I'm not a huge social media person, so I'm not very good at explaining what that is intent. But the way it has been applied and the way it has been implemented has now taken on a journey of its own and leading to a lot of this mental health problems and so on. And that itself is in fact, some of the early work that was done on technology stress was done on social media data. That is because that is the highest form of technology-induced stress, right? So I completely hear your point, and I think it is not just the technology in isolation, but all of it has to work together for that responsibility. I think Becky had a...
Saonee, I really, really enjoyed your lecture, and the 3 case studies were really fascinating. So I've got a kind of big meta question, which is, historically, with previous technologies, pre-digitalization, society globally has said, well, we're going to ban this technology, or we're going to have treaties which say you can't use certain pesticides, or we're going to take lead out of paint, or as a society globally, we've had these agreements. Do you think we should be doing that? When you come across certain technologies, do you ever think, oh, you know what, I wish we could just ban this, or I wish we could... And we've obviously got lots of initiatives at an EU level, at Chinese level, globally, about kind of AI regulation. But do you ever come across that technology and just think, you know what, just for the health of humanity, we'd be better off banning it? Or do you think we should be doing that?
I think we should, I mean, a lot of these are, many of these technologies have not been there long enough to really get the data to say the physical impact and the mental impact. We are seeing that, but I think that studies should be done in what is it doing. I mean, early on, if you remember, when the AirPods came out, it was said that that's much more harmful, right? But there's always a counter study and a counter argument. So what I'm saying is all these should be part of the conversation. Let's not get just carried away by the companies who want to make the money and the users who want the convenience of it right now. Let's fast forward 10 years and say what might be the impact. So if that requires a particular element to be banned or blocked, I think we should do it for the sustainability of the humanity and the human society, right? Anything untethered is always dangerous, right? We see it in our political systems around the world. Someone who's not controlled can become very dangerous, anyone in the world, right? So same thing for technology. If you don't control it somehow or control its use, we might get into dangerous territory. So.
Further questions from the audience? Do we have any questions in the live chat now? Okay. Then we have one thing left to say. So warmly thank you, Saonee, for this lecture. I think we all enjoyed it. And you who are watching from home or office the webinar, thank you for watching and thank you for coming. And hope to see you again some other time. I think we have a lot to discuss and
Thank you.
delve into. So thank you so much, and thank you, Miranda, for the very nice introduction. So here is something little
Oh,
from
thank you.
School of Economics and Management. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much.